Hi, it's time for another math easy solution. Time to discuss further into differential equations and now look at another example 5 of the logistic equation model for population growth video series. And in this one, we'll look at a comparison with the natural growth formula, which was the simple exponential function that I went over in my earlier videos. And again, to get caught up on this, make sure to watch my earlier videos on population growth and the different models of it, all in the links below in the description. I put those all there. So before we get to the example, just some overview of this example. In the 1930s, the biologist G.F. Gauss conducted an experiment with the protozoan Paramecium. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'll get to the definitions of this later down in this video, but just these are just a type of bacteria. This is a specific type of bacteria. I'll go over again the definitions later, so stay tuned for that at the end of this video. So basically, he conducted an experiment with this type of bacteria and used a logistic equation to model his data. And the table below gives his daily count of the population of protozoa. Again, that bacteria. I'll get to the definitions later. So he estimated that the initial relative growth rate to be 0.7944 and the carrying capacity to be 64. And note, Gauss used the same K values for both models, and I'll get to that as I get further into this video. And here is the table. So this is the population of that bacteria at the first day it's 2, and then after 16 days it goes all the way to 57, and that's the observed data. So the example states, find the exponential and logistic models for Gauss's data. So the exponential, that is the typical basic natural growth formula, and it says compare the predicted values with the observed values and comment on the fit. Yeah, alright, so the first thing we're going to do is, well, let's look at what we were given. So we're given this table as well as the growth rate here, the relative growth rate of 0.794. So, yeah, we're given relative growth rate. Write this down and I'll show you what this means. So relative growth rate is equal to 0.7944. And now what this means is like I explained in my last video, it's let's say the growth rate, we'll call this a derivative of the population over P, or in other words, relative to the total population. So this is one you could also write as 1 over P dP over dt, that's just P prime, derivative, and this is, we're given that it equals 2.7944, so that's what Gauss used. Yeah, so now let's look at the exponential model. So find the exponential and logistic models. So what I'll do is recall the exponential model, recall the formula for it. I'll write that down in a bit. So exponential model. And this model, as I again showed in my earlier videos on population growth, is dP over dt equals to K. So this is the lowercase k times p, and where the k is the proportionality constant. Now if you just move over the p on the other side, what we get is dp over, so write this 1 over p, dp over dt equals to k. So we just rearrange that. In other words, this is the same as this right here. This is the relative growth rate. So for the k variable in the exponential model, that is actually the relative growth rate. So that's what it is. And also recall that the solution to this differential equation was found out to be P of t equals 2 P0, or the initial population times e to the kt, where k is that proportionality constant k there. And in this case, in the exponential model, that is the relative growth rate. So this equals 2, and our initial population P0, so time, this one is going to be T of 0, this one will be P0, or the initial population. So 2 is the initial population. So this equals to 2e, and then we'll write the k value, which is 0.7944. 0.7944 and then t. Yeah, and there, this is the model. So this is the model, the exponential model for the population growth of the bacteria that that Gauss used in his experiments. Alright, so now that we have this model for the exponential function, let's look at the logistic model. So first of all, recall the logistic model from my earlier videos on this. Again, make sure to watch this if you haven't already done so. Put those in the link below again. So the logistic model, the governing differential equation was dp over dt equals to k times p. Now we have this 1 minus p over capital K. So this one is capital K. I'll just draw it a bit bigger, indicating this is the carrying capacity. Yeah, and this carrying capacity, again, that is our 64 right here. So this 64, that is just, well, K, capital K, indicated by, just to make it look like capital. So that's the carrying capacity, and again, recall carrying capacity is just the limiting or the maximum population due to limited resources. Yeah, and that's used in the logistic equation. The relative growth model doesn't have that carrying capacity in it. So now when we have this, and now if we were to write the relative growth rate, just move the p on the other side. So we have this 1 over p dp over dt. This equals to, well, k, the proportionality constant, times 1 minus p over capital K, the carrying capacity. Yeah, so as you can see, this relative growth rate has this extra factor of 1 minus p over k, but the logistic model uses this value 0.7944, so we will need a value for k in this case because it's not exactly the relative growth rate as it is in the exponential model, but it still uses this. It still uses the estimated. Gauss used the initial growth rate to be 0.7944. Anyways, for the logistic equation, so you use that anyway. So what we'll do is check if that's a reasonable assumption. So what we'll do is at p of 0 equals to 2. So we're going to get the relative growth rate of the initial one, and the capital K carrying capacity is 64. Put these together, what we have is the, well, relative growth rate p prime over p. That's just this over there. That's the same thing as I explained above. This equals to now lowercase k. Now we have a 1 minus population p0. I'll just do this so the initial. So the initial one for population and the rate is going to be plug into the p0 is 2 there, and then we have a 64, so 2 over 64. As you can see, this is a 1 minus this, which is actually a very small number. Yeah, in fact, if we were to calculate this out, so 1 minus 2 over 64, that's about 0.97. So this is roughly equal to k times, well, 0.97, which is close to 1 anyway. So this is relatively close to k, or the one used above here. So if we were assuming they're the same ones, this is still roughly close to it because it's about 0.97 times it. So what this means is that Gauss's estimation of it is reasonable. So I'll write as a reasonable estimation for the k value, and basically assuming that it's the relative growth rate that he had determined, or the initial relative growth rate. So now that we have this, this k value estimated as a relative growth rate of 0.7944, what we'll do now is again recall that the solution to this logistic model is, as explained in my earlier video on the analytic solution, so p of t is equal to the carrying capacity, capital K, and then divided by 1 plus a e negative kt, like that, where a is equal to capital K minus p0, or the initial population, all divided by p0. And now this a value, well, we can calculate that. That's just 64 minus 2, the initial population, over 2. So this equals to 62 over 2, which equals to, well, 31. So that's just 31. K is 64, and little k is 0.7944. So the formula is going to be equal to now. So the model, so the logistic model is equal to 64 over 1 plus 31 e to the negative 0.7944 t. And there is our logistic model. So now let's basically model these and compare it with the observed data. And that is what I've done here in this Excel sheet. And you can actually download this exact Excel file in the link below. I'll put that in the description, so make sure to download that if you want to play around with this. So basically this is comparison with the natural growth. So the K value, lower k is 0.7944, the capital K carrying capacity is 64, and then P0 initial is 2, A value is 31. That's just the calculation there. As you can see, it is simply carrying capacity minus initial divided by the initial population. So here's the table. So here is 1 all the way to 16, 0 all the way to 16 days. And then here's observed 2 to 57. And then the logistic model here, which is equal to C7, which is carrying capacity divided by 1 plus, and then C9 is the A value, exponent, or e to the power of negative, C6, which is here, 0.7944 times t, which is in days, like that. And again, have it for each one. And then also for the exponential model, we have it over here. And this exponential model is just the initial population. This is C8, which is 2, and then C6, which is here. So exponent e to the power of k times the day. So C6 is little k. And that's what we have. And as you can see from the model here, the exponential model, because there's no carrying capacity, it just keeps going on to infinity, as you can see here. It's just going up. Well, this one is 600. Over 600,000 population of the bacteria, which is just clearly wrong. And now here I've graphed those out. So here if you graph them out, and it looks something like this. So this is the population. As you can see, the logistic model is in orange. It's matching up with this observed data in blue dots reasonably well. But the exponential model, as you can see, after about 5-ish, it just goes to really, really high and just way off. So as you can see, the logistic model is much more accurate in this population growth of this bacteria than the exponential model. So here I've copied and pasted that data onto here just for completeness sake, and you can actually download these exact notes as well. So here's the table. As you can see, this is approaching the carrying capacity after about 11 days. And then the fit for the logistic equation, as you can see, it's pretty reasonable across there. Again, there's some spread, but it's decently reasonable. And then this one right here, after about, let's say, 5 days, like that. This is about 5 days. Greater than it, as you can see, this one is getting further and further off, so just way off there. So just to recap, the logistic model fits the observed data reasonably well. The exponential model is reasonable initially, but becomes way off after about 5 days there. And this is, again, due to the lack of a carrying capacity in the model, in the exponential model, which accounts, which the carrying capacity accounts for the fact that a population can't grow endlessly because of limiting resources. And as you can see here, this is just going really, really high here, which just doesn't make sense because there's not enough resources in any typical environment for that. So now here's the definitions I want to go over, as well as a history lesson on Gauss. So protozoan, so this is the bacteria was used was protozoan Paramecium, something like that. I think that's how you pronounce it. But anyways, just to get some definitions, also it's pretty interesting stuff as well. So some definitions: protozoan is a biological classification of organisms, often encompassing a diverse group of single-cell organisms. So just really tall, really small bacteria or organisms with a single cell. A cell is basically the basic structure, structural and functional and biological unit of all living organisms. So basically anything that has life, and this one is the smallest one. It is the smallest unit of life that can replicate independently of anything else, and it's often called the building blocks of life. And Paramecium is a genus of a specific type of protozoan. So protozoan is just a classification of organisms, and oftentimes that classification is involved just grouping diverse single cell organisms. And Paramecium is a genus, I'll explain that in a bit, of a specific type of these single-celled organism classification. And a genus is a taxonomic rank. Again, this is the science of grouping things together in the biological classification, and it's just above species and below family. So this is another type of classification. So Paramecium is a classification of this. It's a classification of this specific classification of single-celled organisms. So it's just a lot of just grouping wordings and stuff. And a species is often defined as the largest grouping in which individuals within can reproduce. For example, this is can be seen as the gene pool, or for example, a specific type of birds. If they can all reproduce with each other, then that would be a species. But if there's different type of bird that can't reproduce, then that'll be a different species as well. Yeah, and then the genus is just above this classification, so this would probably group those kind of birds together. And a family, this is so this one is just above species and below family. And a family has a more broader classification, and there's no universal rules agreed upon it. And I'm not going to get too much into that. But basically, if it's birds, then it'd probably group them with some other type. Not sure, other type of flying or other animals or whatnot. Anyways, so let's go to a history lesson on this on Gauss. His full name is Georgy Frankenfitch. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it. Gauss, and was a Russian biologist. Lived from 1910 to 1986, so about 76 years. He's also known as Georgy Gause. You could spell it like that. He's best known for his 1932 paper detailing what is now known as the competitive exclusion principle, which has become a fundamental concept in the science of ecology. Ecology is just the study of interactions between organisms, just living things, and their environment. And the principle, this principle, or competitive exclusion principle, argues that no two species with similar ecological requirements can coexist in a stable equilibrium. This means that when two species compete for exactly the same requirements, one will always be slightly more efficient, because you can't have two exact same, than the other, and thus will reproduce at a higher rate. What this means is that the less efficient species will face local extinction as a result, because the other species is just reproducing and taking all the resources. And this principle is also known as Gauss's law of competitive exclusion, or just Gauss's law. And then later he devoted most of his life to the research of antibiotics. And again, antibiotics or antibacterials, that's another way of saying it, are a type of antimicrobials. The type of this kind of drug, antimicrobial drug, fix that typo, used in the treatment and prevention of bacterial infections. So just a bunch of stuff here. And an antimicrobial is an agent that kills microorganisms. These are just microscopic organisms, or inhibits their growth, which prevents them from growing. So that's what he did. He ended up devoting later his life to research of antibiotics. And again, so he was a big factor in the science of ecology and biology as a whole, and especially coming up with proof for this competitive exclusion principle, again, where he used the same bacteria, types of bacteria as this Paramecium protozoan stuff in his research and experiments, as well as this modeling it, this kind of experiment using the logistic equation. Anyways, that's all for today. I hope you'll learn from this. pretty extensive example video, as well as some definitions on biology and history of G.F. Gauss, or Georgy Gause. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. And again, like always, you can download these exact notes as well as the Excel file in the links below. And hopefully you learned something new about biology and logistic equation. Anyways, that's all for today. Hopefully you learned. And like always, you could download the notes in the link below. And stay tuned for another math easy solution.